Good morning, everyone. Again, my name is Tim Thompson, and I have the distinct honor to introduce Congressman Rick Larsen, who represents the 2nd Congressional District in Washington State. I would say that Rick's committee assignments are not only relevant to today, but they're essential. He serves as on the Transportation Infrastructure Committee and chairs the Aviation Committee, and he's also a senior member of the Armed Services. I like to refer to Rick in a Washington State tradition that started with the late Senator Warren Magnuson, who described himself as not the show horse, but the workhorse. And I believe that Rick serves that legacy for the state excellently. He's an effective member of Congress, known for his bipartisanship and his ability to get things done. And I would also just note that one of the pride that Rick, that I give you, I think you have current street cred on. In addition to the many of your accomplishments and your committee assignments, we're most proud of the fact that you're chair of the Soccer Caucus. And we both know, Rick, we're going to get the World Cup out in the Pacific Northwest and in Seattle. So please welcome Congressman Rick Larsen, who is fresh from a meeting with the president. The floor is yours, Congressman.
Thanks, Tim. To say I'm fresh from a meeting with the president and 9,000 of my closest friends would be more accurate. But thanks, Tim, for the introduction. I enjoyed working with you as well as your former boss, former Representative Norm Dix. And I want to thank CGLA Infrastructure for inviting me to join this year's forum. As Tim said, I'm Representative Rick Larsen from Washington State's 2nd Congressional District, which, to think about it geographically, is north of Seattle and none of Seattle, so the North Puget Sound area. I'm also, as Tim noted, a senior member of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee and chair of the Aviation Subcommittee. So right now, Congress is really in, I think, the last legs of negotiating the bipartisan infrastructure package or framework, as some call it, the BIF, and it could not come at a more important time. In our state of Washington, as for instance, the Association of Washington Business estimates the total infrastructure needs in our state need to be more than $222 billion, including $146.5 billion for highways and local roads, and another $5.2 billion for bridges. That's just one state. And in my district and in districts across the country, transportation means jobs, and it is key to the economic recovery. The nation needs a bold and FDR-like investment in our nation's infrastructure to create well-paying jobs, to produce long-term economic recovery and growth. And because it is the 21st century, don't do it like we used to do it, but do it so that we build a cleaner and greener transportation network. It's important to continue to invest in traditional infrastructure like roads, bridges, highways, airports, and waterways, as we have done in the past. However, today's investment has to be bold for our times as well, to create new jobs and to remove emissions from the transportation network in our fight against climate change. So any investment in infrastructure must enable local transit agencies to replace aging diesel buses with cleaner, electric, and lower emission buses, as well as the related infrastructure. Help ferry systems like ours in Washington State, we have the largest ferry system in the country, to transition to low and no emission ferries, and to invest in short and long distance passenger rail to connect communities across the Pacific Northwest and the country. So in August, the Senate approved what they call the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. This bipartisan infrastructure framework totals $1.2 trillion in overall spending and $550 billion for increased investment in infrastructure over 5 years. And priorities for my district and the state include the Promoting Service and Transportation Act, a piece of bipartisan legislation that promotes career opportunities and improves diversity in the transportation workforce. And this is an absolute necessity over the next 20 years as we see increasing retirements in transportation. It includes over $2 billion in funding for low and zero emission bus grants. It includes $250 million to establish a pilot program to provide grants to purchase electric and low emission ferries. So although it didn't include all of my priorities, I'll continue to push for investments that target federal funding to community projects to fight climate change and to keep the economy moving forward. And as chair of the Aviation Subcommittee, there's a lot of work to be done there. As chair, I focused on delivering pandemic relief to sustain the aviation and aerospace workforce, to ensure that aviation remains a gold standard in the United States, to foster innovation in the U.S. airspace, and to improve our competitiveness and enhance the travel experience for passengers. And as the nation works to get to the other side of the pandemic, Congress has to continue to work with the airlines, the airports, industry stakeholders to drive long-term economic recovery and growth. And in March, when the president signed the American Rescue Plan, it also included my bipartisan language to prevent the aerospace manufacturing supply chain furloughs and recall workers who were furloughed due to the pandemic. And the AMJP, or the Aviation Manufacturing Jobs Protection Act, received 480 applications across 2 rounds to help sustain the aviation workforce and get through the pandemic, so that there is a supply chain in the aviation manufacturing workforce when the economy turns around. The rescue plan also included $8 billion in emergency funding to help U.S. airports keep infrastructure projects on track and to maintain operations. And we'll need to continue to push for a national aviation preparedness plan to ensure the safety of aviation crew, employees, and passengers, and to restore confidence in air travel. One issue that's not talked about much is that long-term economic growth in transportation is only possible with a continued investment in a U.S. workforce to produce that next generation of civil engineers, of operators, of technicians, of aerospace workers, of transit workers. So just in the aviation industry alone, as an example, we need more than 800,000 pilots, 769,000 technicians, and nearly 20,000 air traffic controllers to meet demands over the next 10 years. I think that's just one part of the transportation infrastructure network in the United States. Think about what that might mean for other parts as well. To meet that demand, we have to expand the talent pool from which aviation and other transportation industries have traditionally drawn. So earlier this year, in addition to introducing the Promoting Service and Transportation Act, I chaired a hearing to learn from key stakeholders about the challenges with and recommendations for developing a robust and diverse transportation workforce. And I'll also continue to work to improve access to opportunities such as STEM-based apprenticeships through my bipartisan American Wings Act, which provides a 6-year runway for high school students through community colleges to registered apprenticeships, preparing them for well-paying jobs in in-demand industries, which include transportation. So there's a lot of work to do in the transportation world, on workforce, on investment, on ensuring diversity in the future. And I'm confident that with your advocacy and with bipartisan support, bold investments that Congress makes now will create more well-paying jobs, grow the economy, and build a cleaner and greener transportation network. So Tim, thanks again for inviting me today, and I have some time for questions. I can't imagine what people might want to ask me about transportation at this hour. Go ahead.
Well, let me start out with the one that everybody's on the edge of their seats for, without revealing special confidences that were talked about with the president and the House Democrats. Can you give us some high points about what your impressions were? And I think the big question is your prediction on timeframes. And we promised to use the rules of the United States Senate, and that is we will not hold you accountable for anything you say.
Oh, I thought it was the definition of a secret in Washington, D.C. is something you tell one person at a time. So that could be the other rule that we're going to play under. No, it's fine. I'm never off the record, as it turns out. So, and I thought the burning question was, will the Sounders win the MLS Cup? And the answer is yes, this year. So the president made a couple of just general points. One is that we are at an inflection point in history, much like we were in the 30s and the 60s. What we need to do by both passing the Build Back Better Act and the bipartisan infrastructure package really defines what side of that inflection point we're going to be on. In this century, now 21 years into the century, we need to show the rest of the world that we can govern, that we can act. He is headed to he's going to the G7 meeting first. And he meets with the Pope, and then he goes to the COP26 meeting in Glasgow, Scotland. And it's important that the president, when he lands, is able to show other world leaders that the U.S. can govern. In fact, he made this point, and I would back him up on this. So when he meets with allies and friends, the number one question isn't, will you help us with our security, because that's a given. It's, can you govern? Can the most successful democracy in the history of the planet, as we see ourselves, can you continue to govern? And passing these bills shows that we will that we can answer that question in the affirmative. And that's kind of the big message. Now, there are also some concerns we continue to have, not me, but others have, about the bills. And the president made a point about saying, not only do I understand you, but he said a friend of his gave him a line, says, I overstand you. Like, I not only understand you, I understand you a lot. I overstand what you're saying about concerns. And so he walked through the broad structure of the Build Back Better, and there's a lot to it, and I won't get into it here. A lot of that will be released very soon here in the U.S. But I think in terms of process, it's probably more important, like when is all this going to happen? And I won't get into there's a lot of arcane parliamentary procedure as part of this, so I won't get into that either. So I'm going to tell you nothing. Today is, I know you said you have folks around the world maybe listening in. So right now in Washington, D.C., it's a little after 11 o'clock, before 11:30 a.m. I would expect that we're going to be in session all day, most of the day, into the night, maybe early tomorrow morning, to get both of these bills done. One would be the Build Back Better bill, which is kind of another term, the reconciliation package. But that's where the child care tax credit and child care support, so that moms and dads can, afford child care so they can get back into the workforce. That's where the affordable housing money is, so that we have construction jobs, building affordable housing for our communities and our neighbors. That's where that is. That's where a $555 billion investment over 10 years in clean energy technologies is located. That's where that bill is. Creating jobs here in the U.S., helping to create those jobs that will develop the clean technologies to fight climate change. That's where that is. Separately is the bipartisan infrastructure package, which is, again, as I noted, 1.2 trillion over 5 years, including 550 billion new dollars for that investment in roads, bridges, highways, transit, into broadband infrastructure in the United States as well, to close the digital divide. All this taking place, sometime late into the night tonight, or in the early morning tomorrow. I would note, can it all be done? It's important to note for folks who are tracking the process that the infrastructure bill, the roads, bridges, highways, broadband infrastructure bill, all the debate on that is done, all the process on that is done in the House of Representatives. It's done in the Senate, except for we just need to vote yes or no. So there's no process attached to the infrastructure bill. It is an up or down, one vote, and then sent to the White House to pass it, and I do believe it will pass. So really the process and all the hand-wringing and machinations that folks will be watching really will be built around this Build Back Better Act. So that's kind of where things sit. If anyone can call my office from anywhere in the world and today, and we'll try to answer any questions you have.
Well, yeah, one quick question before you go, and I know I got to get you out of here, so I'm going to honor that time commitment. But I would note that you heard it here first, CGLA. The Congressman Larson's given you the game plan for the next 48 hours. Rick, an issue that I know is great concern to you. We spent yesterday talking about hydrogen projects and the advancement of these. That really, you could have given a number of the presentations having listened to you for a period of time, but it was both ports and the infrastructure associated, trucks and vehicles. The issues that we've been invested in, and it reminded me of our visit to Moses Lake with Aerotech and the concept of the hydrogen aviation future. Can you comment a little bit about what you're seeing on the transportation side? Because hydrogen appears to not only have emerged around the world, but we're really seeing great promise and traction. And I was blown away by some of the presentations about how far along they are, from everything from transportation vehicles to maritime vessels, and in the aviation sector. And with your committee assignment, can you just give us some brief comments, and then we'll thank you and get you back on schedule?
Yeah, well, I'll let folks know know how one member of Congress is thinking about it. I also happen to be the chair of Aviation Subcommittee, but it also is important as one member. Part of this is to try to be sure that we can educate a larger cadre of members of Congress about how the fuel source of travel is changing. In aviation, we're mostly at Jet A, right? Avgas, aviation gas. Part of the Build Back Better includes, I think it's still $1.25 over a 10-year subsidy for sustainable aviation fuels. So think about step one is where we are. Step two is sustainable aviation fuels, or SAF. Step three is how quickly electric propulsion, electric engines proliferate, first in short haul or regional, and then longer regional, and then hydrogen. That's kind of a continuum of thought in the United States. In Europe, it's a bit different, and it's faster. And so we, I think, need to be cognizant of how the source of fuel for transportation is changing, what other regions of the world and how they're addressing it, and then what we need to do to support the infrastructure to support that. To build out a hydrogen-based or hydrogen electric hybrid-based infrastructure is much different than the infrastructure that exists at airports today. And so then it becomes a question of how much is that going to be a federal public subsidy? How much of that is airports as public entities themselves making those investments along with airlines? And then adoption as well from airlines. So long as it's affordable, so long as airlines see this as more than just fighting climate change, which it is, but seeing it as economical as well, from a life cycle cost. I think that's where we need to begin selling it. But we're in the early stages here in Congress in thinking about it. I'm probably, not to pat myself on the back, I'm probably ahead of most folks in thinking about this because it's my job to think about these things. But we need to build a larger cadre of members of Congress who are putting time into that. And I'm trying to do that as well, because this is an exciting time in aviation. It's an exciting time in transportation, fuel. First time I've ever said that in my life, but it is an exciting time in how we think about how we're going to power transportation in the future.
Well, I greatly appreciate the time. It's a very busy day for you. And I just want to conclude on the fact that your friend, Gordon Arbuckle, and myself will follow up with you on the hydrogen piece, because there's a lot of elements and they represent a lot of congressional districts. So we'll get you back some of the findings and some of the discussions we had, and also note the other members that potentially are bullish about this issue. And thanks again, Rick. Appreciate your leadership, and most importantly, taking the time and go get this thing passed.
Thanks. And I appreciate CGLA for inviting me. I appreciate the opportunity. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Rick.